At my sister's graduation, my parents announced they were disowning me, but started screaming when I unveiled their secret. My name's Selene, and at my sister's Harvard graduation, my parents stood in front of everyone and disowned me, publicly. No warning, no explanation, just a smile for her and silence for me. They left my name off the invitations, off the program, off the family. But what they didn't know was that I had already uncovered their secrets. Stolen inheritance, forged documents, a house sold behind my back. And in the end, they weren't the ones who exposed me. I exposed them. Before we dive in, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. I arrived early. Not because I was excited, just because I wanted to see if they'd done it. If they really had the audacity to make it official. The sun was already beating down on Harvard Yard, all proud and golden, like it was congratulating everyone except me. Students in caps and gowns buzzed like bees around the campus gates. Parents clutched roses, gift bags, glossy programs. I held nothing, just my breath. When I spotted my parents near the reserved seating, I walked slower. My mother, Astria, wore a pale blue suit and her usual hard smile. My father, Everett, had his blazer folded over his arm, one hand on his phone, one foot impatiently tapping the grass. Callista stood between them, glowing in her robe, sash, and layered honor cords. Harvard's own poster child. They didn't notice me right away. When they did, my mother's eyes skimmed me like I was someone she vaguely recognized from her tennis club. "Oh, Selene," she said flatly. "You came." "I got the invitation," I answered, ignoring the pinch in her tone. She gave a dry laugh. "You must have seen a forwarded version. I wasn't sure the RSVP list made it that far." My father didn't speak. He just checked his watch. Callista opened her arms for a brief hug, and I leaned in out of habit. "You look amazing," I told her. "Thanks," she said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "I'm glad you're here." But her eyes were darting sideways, watching our mother, always calculating how much warmth she was allowed to show. I scanned the seating chart posted on the wooden easel beside the entrance arch. "The Caldwell family," it read in bold script. Beneath it, Everett, Astria, Callista, plus 2 guests. I searched for my name. It wasn't there. Someone handed me a badge. White. No family crest. No ribbon. Just the word guest in Times New Roman. I stood for a long time staring at that badge. I'd helped my mother design the original crest 20 years ago. We spent a week on the typography. I should have left. That would have been the logical, self-respecting thing to do. But instead, I clipped the badge to my blazer and walked toward the seating tent like a ghost showing up to her own funeral. The ceremony began promptly at 11:03. A few speakers came and went, professors, trustees. I sat alone in the far left section, next to an elderly man who was asleep and a toddler scribbling on her program. Then Everett stood and stepped up to the microphone. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and smiled like a senator about to pitch a bill. "Today," he began, "we celebrate the brilliance and dedication of our eldest daughter, Callista. Her journey has been nothing short of extraordinary." Polite applause. Cameras clicked. Callista looked down modestly. "But," he continued, "this day also marks a turning point for our family. A necessary shift in energy, values, and focus." My stomach dropped. "We've made a difficult decision. From this day forward, we will no longer be extending ourselves to those who do not align with the integrity and vision we hold. That includes our youngest daughter, Selene." Silence. No gasp. No protest. Just a ripple of awkward coughs and rustling fabric. I didn't stand. I didn't cry. I sat there with my hands on my knees, suddenly very aware of every nerve ending in my body. My ears buzzed. I stared at the edge of the stage. Callista didn't say a word. Someone in the row behind me whispered, "Did he just say?" Another voice. "Who does that? At a graduation?" I swallowed, turned my face slightly away from the stage, and forced my jaw to stay still. The speech continued. Something about investments, future, roots, and weeds. I couldn't track the words anymore. Eventually, I stood up and quietly walked out of the tent. Not rushed, not shaken, just methodical. like it had happened before. Later at the reception, I tried to find my seat. There was a table labeled Caldwell and Guests. I walked up to it, scanning the name cards. Nothing. Callista's name was there. So was our Aunt Miriam, even her college roommate, but not mine. A girl I hadn't seen since middle school looked up from the next table and blinked. "Oh, hey, I thought you weren't coming. Your mom told everyone it was a closed family celebration. She said something about keeping the focus clear." She smiled awkwardly, like maybe that wasn't as cruel as it sounded. On the table sat a folded ivory card. I opened it. It read, "Congratulations to our only daughter, Callista. With all our love, Mom and Dad." That was the moment something inside me clicked. Not snapped, not broke, just tilted. A woman in a floral dress passed by, glanced at me and said, "You must be with the catering team. You're not wearing the family pin." I looked down at my badge. Guest. No name, no title. In my head, I heard myself say, "Not even a name tag, just a ghost badge. That's what I am to them now." So I smiled, said nothing, picked up a glass of Prosecco from a tray, and started walking toward the back exit of the tent. I didn't go straight home after the reception. I walked, past the cafes buzzing with graduation lunches, past families laughing on the sidewalk, past a little girl holding a balloon that said, "Harvard Strong." It wasn't until the sun dipped behind the red brick skyline that I finally boarded the T and let the city carry me back to my small apartment in Somerville. I climbed the stairs slowly, peeled off my shoes by the door, and stood still for a moment. The silence in my place was familiar, like a worn sweater I never had the heart to throw away. I tossed the graduation program on the kitchen counter, but it didn't land the way I expected. Its pages fluttered open, and my eyes landed on a photo from the ceremony, my parents with Callista. All three smiling. The caption read, "Proud moment for the Caldwell family." No trace of me. Later that night, I sat cross-legged on the living room rug, an old yearbook spread across my lap. It was from Callista's high school graduation 10 years ago. My mom had once told me not to bother showing up that day either. "It's not your moment," she'd said. The page with the family tribute caught my attention, one of those custom ads people buy at the back of the book. "To the daughter who never gave up. We are so proud of you, Callista." A single photo, my parents and Callista standing on our front porch in spring. I remembered that photo. I'd been in it too. I'd stood right next to her in that exact spot, wearing a dress Mom picked. I remember because she yelled at me for getting a wrinkle across the waist. But in this version, I was gone. Cropped out cleanly. I touched the edge of the page and stared until my vision blurred. They didn't forget me. They erased me. The next morning, I woke to sunlight and a stiff neck. I had fallen asleep on the floor, curled up with a pillow and that yearbook beside me like some kind of haunted diary. I pulled myself up and got ready for work. At the nonprofit where I handled donor relations, nobody mentioned what happened. Of course not. Why would they? The Caldwells had always maintained their image well. And I never talked about them. Not really. Around 10, while I was pouring my second cup of coffee, one of the junior analysts, Rachel, wandered in and said casually, "Hey, I saw a few pics on social last night. Your sister's graduation looked amazing. That red dress? Stunning." I turned, steadying my hand so I didn't spill the mug. "She always looks the part," I replied, then added with a small smile, "I was there, just in the shadows like always." Rachel didn't catch the edge in my voice. She laughed. "You're mysterious like that." Mysterious. That's one word for it. I headed back to my desk, past a coworker I knew had once played golf with my father. He nodded politely but didn't ask how I was. Another woman I used to babysit for looked away as I passed, pretending to dig through her bag. They weren't being mean, just choosing not to see. I sat down, opened my inbox, and stared at the screen while my reflection hovered faintly in the glass. What kind of family invites you just to disown you publicly? That line echoed in my head like a song lyric I couldn't stop humming. Worse, what kind of daughter still shows up, hoping it might be different? I hated how much I wanted them to change their mind. How badly I had clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, they were still my family. I glanced over at the stack of papers in my drawer, old birthday cards addressed to our daughters, family newsletters where my name was squeezed into a corner like a footnote. One year, they sent a holiday card to donors that only featured Callista's photo. They said it was a branding choice. It was never one moment. It was thousands of moments. Small cuts I'd ignored. Until now. Because last night, when I picked up my bag and slipped out the back of the reception tent, I didn't leave empty-handed. I took the envelope. The ivory one with gold foil letters and the handwritten message inside. To our only daughter, Callista. I'd slid it into my purse without blinking, because ghosts don't knock things over, they just remove things without being noticed. And once I got home, I placed it in a shoebox under my bed, beside a growing collection of items they never intended me to keep. That night, I didn't cry. I got quiet, and then I started digging. The rain started just after midnight, quiet at first, tapping softly against the kitchen window like someone too polite to knock. I sat there with a blanket draped over my shoulders and my laptop open in front of me, casting a pale blue light across the room. I hadn't moved in hours. I had decided to stop crying. And so, I didn't. I clicked through folders I hadn't opened in years. There was still a shared drive linked to my personal email, left over from when I used to do part-time accounting for the Family Foundation. They'd never revoked access. I was the one who set it up. Typical of them, really. They like to erase people with words, not technology. I scanned through documents aimlessly at first, old tax files, donation receipts, board meeting notes, but then something flagged in my brain. A folder labeled holdings_updated. Inside it, a PDF file. Transfer authorization, Seaside Property, final. I clicked, and there it was. My name, my full legal name. Typed above a signature that looked almost like mine, but not quite. The S was flatter, the loop on the L too wide. It was a bad copy, and it had been notarized. I stared at the name of the notary public in the margin. Savannah Caldwell, my cousin, of course. I grabbed a file from my drawer, an old lease agreement with my real signature on it, and compared the two side by side. No match, not even close. It hit me then. What they'd done wasn't just betrayal, it was criminal. They didn't just cut me out of a speech, they forged my signature to strip me of ownership on the only thing Dad ever gave me in his will, a stake in the beach house in Cape Elizabeth, the place I helped repaint the porch rails during college, the place they let Callista host her 30th birthday, with a few close friends, which turned into a bonfire for 50. I closed the laptop slowly, like sealing a coffin. I couldn't sleep after that. Around 3, I picked up the phone and called the only person in my family who ever treated me like I had a voice. Aunt Mavis? There was a pause, then her familiar rasp. Solène? Honey, are you okay? Not really. My voice cracked on the words. I found a property transfer, with my name, but it's not my signature. Another long silence. Oh, Solène, she whispered. You saw it, didn't you? I asked. I didn't know what to do, she confessed. Your mama told me it was just paperwork, that they were cleaning up the books for tax season. I leaned against the kitchen wall, sliding down to the floor. You knew they were moving my name off the deed. I thought maybe it was a mistake, or something they'd tell you later. I'm sorry. I should have said something. Her voice wavered, old guilt surfacing. You know how your mother gets. And your father. He just follows. That sentence lingered in the air like smoke. You know how your mother gets, like she was a storm you couldn't stop, only brace for. I'm tired of making excuses for them, Aunt Mavis. I know, baby. Her voice cracked again. I know. We sat in silence for a while, just breathing, just listening to the rain. By dawn, the edges of my resolve had hardened. I brewed coffee and sat at my dining table with legal pads, highlighters, and the old laptop I hadn't touched in months. This wasn't just about a house. It wasn't about being cropped out of a picture. It was the pattern. The way every time something mattered, something real, they found a way to uninvite me. From the yearbook ad, from family holidays, from the house I painted myself into. But now, they were going to remember exactly who I was, not because I'd ask for space at their table again, but because I'd be the one flipping the table over. By mid-morning, the clouds outside had started to thin, but the heaviness in my chest only deepened. I hadn't slept, just worked through the night, cross-referencing, checking deed numbers, combing through local property registries like a woman possessed. A soft hum from my space heater filled the silence as I stared at the screen, my coffee cold beside me. There it was. Bar Harbor, Maine. Parcel ID 0017426. The family vacation house, the cedar shingled one with the rocking chairs on the porch, the one my grandmother left to the Caldwell Family Trust. Status, sold. Buyer, Harlow Holdings, LLC. I clicked the name. Harlow Holdings didn't even try to hide it. The registered agent was a business attorney based in Boston, the same one Callista had posted about on LinkedIn 6 weeks ago. They didn't transfer it. They sold it. Without telling me. Without telling anyone. There wasn't a press release, no family email, no dinner table talk, just a silent surgical erasure, like I wasn't a beneficiary at all. Like I hadn't spent summers there painting shutters, sanding the railing, rinsing off sea salt from my knees while Dad grilled salmon on the back deck. But now it was funding Callista's boutique firm. The slogan on her website even said, "Legacy-minded investing inspired by family values." My grandmother would have been horrified. I closed the browser. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was violation. That's the word. This wasn't grief anymore. It was something sharper, colder. I needed air. I threw on a coat and walked to the bookstore 3 blocks away, hoping the rhythm of motion would slow my thoughts. I wasn't there to shop, just to think without looking at a glowing screen. But fate had other plans. Just as I turned the corner by the self-help aisle, I heard her voice. "Selene?" I turned. Mrs. Henderson, an old friend of my mother's, known for potlucks and passive aggression, was holding a book titled Aging Gracefully Through Faith. She smiled like she didn't know her teeth were knives. "Darling, I heard Callista's doing so well. Your mother says she's expanding into luxury real estate. Isn't that just wonderful?" I forced a polite nod. "Yeah, funny. I thought that house was still ours." The shift in her expression was microscopic, a flicker of recognition, the kind people get when they realize they've said too much. "Oh, I don't know all the details. You know how parents are, always making moves." "Without their kids?" I asked, eyes steady. She didn't answer, just smiled again. That same smile I'd seen at every holiday dinner. The one that said, "Don't make a scene, sweetheart." I left the store without another word. By the time I reached home, my phone buzzed with a text from an old college roommate, someone who had no idea what was going on. "Heard your folks sold the summer house. Callista's killing it. Jealous of her life right now." Jealous. That word sat on my tongue like vinegar. People envied her, because they didn't know the cost of her shine, the silence of everyone she'd stepped over to get it. This wasn't just about business. It was abandonment in 1,000 quiet, well-dressed ways. It was family photos where you've been photoshopped out. It was a legacy where your name doesn't echo anywhere. So I did the only thing that made sense. I changed clothes, printed the deed documents, and packed my bag. Because some answers aren't found online. Some are behind frosted office doors and receptionist smiles, and I knew exactly where to start. I parked across the street from my mother's office and stared at the tinted glass windows of the Caldwell Foundation like they were eyes watching me back. The last time I stood here, I was 16 and holding a printed version of my scholarship essay. Mom told me to come in quietly, not to embarrass her in front of the board. I remembered the dress I wore, navy blue, too tight in the shoulders because we couldn't afford another. She said if I smiled and stood still, maybe they'd consider me for the summer program. I stood still. I smiled. They picked Callista's friend instead. Now, almost 15 years later, I wasn't here to impress anyone. I walked in without calling. The front desk girl, new, maybe an intern, gave me a polite but hesitant smile, the kind you reserve for people who might cause a scene. She asked if I had an appointment. I didn't bother answering. My heels tapped steadily down the hall. Astria Caldwell didn't flinch when I entered her office. She looked up from her screen, not surprised at all. "Solène," she said smoothly, like we'd just had brunch the day before. "I'd like a few minutes." She motioned to the leather chair across from her desk. I stayed standing. Her office hadn't changed. Same white orchids, same award plaques, same framed headline. Mother, philanthropist, visionary. All perfectly arranged. I half expected her to straighten the headline before we spoke. "I regret that you felt hurt," she began, hands folded. "But we did what was best, for the family's image." There it was, the apology that wasn't. "You didn't regret the decision," I replied, my voice steady. "You regret how it looked." She exhaled gently through her nose, as if I were being dramatic. "You're still welcome at events, just as a guest, not as a face of the Caldwell legacy. I hope you understand. It's about cohesion, simplicity." I tilted my head. "You mean control?" Her lips twitched. "We can't have every branch growing in a different direction. People notice." "I hope they do," I said, "because I'm not bending back into shape just to fit your narrative." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. I already knew where she stood, always behind Callista, in front of a camera, beside Dad when it made sense. That evening, I attended the gala. I'd RSVP'd 6 months ago, before the disowning, before the erasure, when I still believed I had a seat in their world. I wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, but the name tag clipped to my coat said Solène R. Not Caldwell, not family. The ballroom buzzed with donors and well-dressed alumni. I kept to the edges, scanning faces. I didn't expect warmth, but I wasn't prepared for how invisible I'd become. Small talk floated past me like perfume. Midway through dinner, a waiter handed out champagne. My father raised his glass. "To our only daughter, Callista, whose brilliance continues to guide this family forward." I froze. A few heads turned toward me, then quickly looked away. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass. Even Callista blinked, clearly unsettled, but she didn't correct him. She just smiled and clinked her glass with the nearest donor. It didn't matter if she agreed. Silence served her just as well. I didn't raise my glass, I didn't speak, but something cracked deep inside, clean and final. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was exile, polished and gift-wrapped. I left quietly before dessert. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. I walked 2 blocks before calling a rideshare. As I sat in the back seat, the city lights blurred past. I replayed every word, every look. My mother's gentle scolding, my father's toast. The way Callista stood just close enough to be admired, just far enough to stay clean. And I knew I wasn't going to wait for an apology or an explanation. They'd made their legacy without me. Now it was my turn. I didn't waste time sleeping in. As soon as the sun broke through the slats in my blinds, I was already at my kitchen island, my laptop screen flickering with legal documents, financial ledgers, and a half-empty coffee cup sweating onto a coaster. Everything I needed was here, not emotionally, but legally. I had spent the night reviewing contracts I was never meant to see, thanks to a shared cloud folder they forgot to revoke my access from. I cross-referenced email threads, matched signatures, pulled metadata off PDFs. The trail wasn't obvious, but it was there. A real estate transaction that rerouted an inheritance, trust disbursements that quietly bypassed me, a marketing memo listing the family image, with only Callista's name and face. I slid the printed files into a velvet envelope, dark burgundy, with gold trim. My mother had once given it to me when I was 12, filled with stationery and sealed with a note. Always write with grace. Now, it would carry my first real reply. By 10, I was standing outside the office of my parents' longtime attorney, Warren Bell. The last time I saw him was at my grandmother's funeral. He greeted me like someone unsure whether to hug or call security. "I need 2 minutes," I said flatly. Warren took the envelope carefully. I could see him scanning the label, typed, not handwritten, before glancing up. "I'll have to review. There's a notarized affidavit, a trust challenge, and a digital link with voice recordings. The instructions are inside." "I assume this comes with expectations?" he asked. "No," I said. "It comes with consequences." I didn't wait for him to respond. Back in the elevator, my reflection stared back at me in the chrome. I looked like someone who hadn't slept, but I felt more awake than I had in years. The voice recordings had taken months to gather. Quiet, patient moments, boardroom halls, car rides, awkward donor meetings. They never thought I'd still be listening. They assumed they'd worn me down, erased me by attrition. One clip played in my head again, clear as day. Mom, in a charity lunch pre-brief. "We only use Callista's face. Selene doesn't fit the image we're selling." Then Dad chuckling. "She used to read everything." Well, I still did. Back at home, I finally sat down. Not at the table. On the floor. I stared at the old family photo still framed near my bookshelf. It was from before Callista's high school graduation. Before the edits. I'd kept it, knowing they'd someday pretend it didn't exist. It felt strange to not feel rage. Not in this moment. Not because I'd forgiven them, but because I'd made my move. I didn't send the envelope with malice. I sent it like you send a receipt, just proof of transaction, proof that I existed, that I saw what they did, that I knew. I called my lawyer that night. "I don't want revenge," I told him. "But I won't let them use my silence as consent. If they're going to erase me, I want the record to show who held the pen." He was quiet for a beat, then said, "Then it starts now." The next morning, I opened my laptop to check the news, just out of habit. But before I even got the chance to send anything, my inbox was already exploding. I hadn't even made coffee yet when the messages started buzzing. 4 missed calls. 2 from blocked numbers. 1 from a reporter in DC. I ignored them all. Instead, I tapped the screen and opened my browser. Front page. There it was, plastered across the homepage of a national nonprofit watchdog site. Luxury charity? Anonymous sources question integrity at the Caldwell Foundation. My throat clenched before I even read the subheader. It was real. The article didn't name me, but it didn't have to. It referenced board documents, internal memos, and direct quotes from emails I knew intimately because I had printed them, read them, cried over them. The public didn't know it was me who found them, but the foundation certainly would. They'd always bragged about being in control of their own narrative. Now the story had slipped through their fingers, and for once, I wasn't the one left out. The story moved fast. By lunch, donors were making quiet exits. 2 gala events were postponed indefinitely. Comments flooded in. Nepotism at its finest. Where did the money go? This is what happens when you erase people for image. And still, I hadn't said a word. I scrolled down to a section titled "Former Stakeholders Silenced" and saw a screenshot of an email chain from 3 years ago. My name wasn't in the message, but it referenced the youngest Caldwell and her unnecessary complications when reviewing board decisions. I could practically hear my mother's tone between the lines. And then came the kicker. Someone had leaked the audio. It wasn't the full library of recordings I had submitted to our lawyer. Just one. The one where Astria, in a room full of donors, said, "We only use Callista's face in marketing. The other one doesn't photograph well with our narrative." Followed by my father's voice. "We need to be careful what Selene finds. She used to read everything." The internet did what it always does. It dissected every syllable. And for once, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt seen. That afternoon, I left the apartment to clear my head. At the corner deli, the cashier gave me a polite smile but didn't say anything. On my walk home, I passed a bus stop where someone was scrolling the article on their phone. I didn't linger. When I got back, there was an email waiting from a PR firm, one I recognized from the foundation's press kits. "We're preparing a unifying statement and would love to include a quote from you, Selene. Your voice matters." No subject line, no personal greeting, just an empty attempt to rope me back in for optics. I didn't reply. That night, while half the family scrambled for damage control, Astria announced a family unity luncheon at her favorite club in Beacon Hill. From what I gathered, 2 board members showed up out of obligation. Callista never arrived. I could almost hear my mother's voice cracking under forced grace. "We're focusing on healing and moving forward." Translation: "We're losing control and need to patch the boat before it sinks." But it was too late. Donors were asking questions. About Bar Harbor, about the trust, about the forged signature. They weren't angry. They were done. At 10 p.m., I refreshed the news site again. A new photo had been added to the article. My mother, exiting the foundation's building in her tailored blazer. But her lapel pin, the gold graduation crest she always wore, was missing. That tiny, gleaming symbol I once would have given anything to earn. Now? I sat alone in my apartment, cross-legged on the couch, laptop on my knees. The shadows were long, the air was still, and for the first time in years I felt light. I didn't have her pin. I had something better. The truth. The courtroom wasn't grand. No ornate woodwork, no dramatic lighting like in the movies. Just rows of tired benches, fluorescent buzz, and the dry scent of old carpet. But for me, this room might as well have been a coliseum. Philip adjusted his tie beside me, tapping the edge of the folder on the table. Across from us, my mother sat with arms crossed, expression unreadable. My father stared at the floor, and Callista scrolled through her phone like it was a dentist appointment. The judge, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and an unforgiving tone, called the hearing to order. I'd filed the petition quietly 2 weeks ago, knowing full well they'd think it was a bluff. A scare tactic. They were wrong. Philip stood. Your Honor, we request that Exhibits A through E be admitted into the hearing record. No one objected. He continued, his voice steady. Included in these exhibits are financial records regarding the Bar Harbor property, notarized evidence of signature fraud, and recordings relevant to exclusionary behavior surrounding the Caldwell Foundation's trust decisions. A rustle passed through the courtroom, but it wasn't until Exhibit D, Grandmother Elise's will, that the silence fractured. The court will note, Philip said, placing a certified copy on the judge's bench. This version predates the one currently in use. It names Selene Caldwell as the primary beneficiary of the Bar Harbor estate and any future inheritance from the Caldwell Trust. Callista's hand froze mid-scroll. My mother's head snapped toward me. My father's voice came out thin and shaky. That version was never supposed to be... The judge raised a hand. Was it notarized and properly witnessed? Philip didn't miss a beat. Yes, ma'am, by the same legal team that handled the original estate division. They were replaced shortly after this document was filed. Everett tried again. But we never meant for that to be the final... The judge cut him off. Intentions aren't law, Mr. Caldwell. Documents are. Callista leaned in toward our mother, whispering furiously. My mother didn't respond. Her face had gone stiff, but there was a flicker in her eye. Panic, maybe. Or worse, recognition. She had known this moment might come. I didn't look at her. I looked forward. Philip went on to play the recording from the donor prep meeting. We only use Callista's face in marketing. The other one doesn't photograph well with our narrative. My mother's voice echoed through the speakers. Then my father's. We need to be careful what Selene finds. She used to read everything. The room was so still, I could hear someone's pen drop 2 rows behind me. Astria stood, almost hissing. You ungrateful girl. You waited all this time just to destroy us? I stood too, my voice calm. I waited so I wouldn't destroy myself in the process. No one moved for a full 5 seconds. Then the judge cleared her throat and ruled. The Bar Harbor property shall revert to Miss Selene Caldwell. The Caldwell Trust's distributions will be frozen pending further audit. In light of the evidence presented, the Foundation's tax filings are hereby referred to the State Attorney General for review. Callista bolted for the door without a word. My father remained in his seat, pale, silent. My mother tried to regain composure, but her face betrayed her. The woman who'd built a world on perception had just watched it unravel on public record. Philip sat back down beside me and whispered, You okay? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked down at the lapel of my coat. The pin I once wanted, the one my mother always wore to those galas, wasn't there. But I didn't need it. The judge's final words still rang in my ears. Miss Caldwell, the rightful heir. They took the pin. I kept the name. 6 months later, I stood barefoot in the center of a sunlit room that didn't exist the last time my parents spoke my name. It was a modest space, renovated from what used to be an old municipal library just outside Providence. I had helped fund its transformation into a literacy and arts center for foster teens, young people who, like me, had once felt invisible in rooms where their presence was either ignored or erased. The event that day wasn't grand. There were no red carpets, no flashbulbs, just mismatched folding chairs, a table of cupcakes, and kids flipping through sketchbooks they'd filled themselves. But it was mine. Every bit of it. And more importantly, it was theirs too. The plaque mounted in the entryway was one of the few things I insisted on keeping formal. It read, "In memory of Elise Caldwell, for the granddaughters they erased and the ones who refused to stay erased." I caught myself tracing my finger across the engraved lettering. I hadn't visited her grave since the ruling, not because I was angry, but because I knew she would have preferred this. Quiet legacy, lived out loud. I hadn't returned to the family foundation. Not once. The court had awarded me full legal custody of the Bar Harbor property and its inheritance funds. I could have sold it, or even burned it to the ground just to start fresh. But I chose a different path. I renovated it and turned it into a writer's retreat for women from foster care backgrounds. The first 2 residents moved in last month. I donated part of the trust in grandmother Elise's name. No press release, no ribbon cutting, just a quiet wire transfer and a handwritten note to the director. Make sure it goes to those who were left out of the photos. My parents never reached out. Not once. Astria and Everett remained silent, buried in layers of tax audits and board reconstructions. I read in a local newsletter that the foundation had temporarily suspended operations. That was the most I'd heard. Callista, though, she surprised me. The envelope came on a Tuesday. No return address, just my name in her handwriting, slanted, sharp, still the same. Inside was a single page. No flowery apology, just 10 words. "You were right. I'm sorry it took this to see it." I didn't write back. I didn't need to. I placed the letter in a small lockbox alongside the old graduation pin I once believed would make me feel like part of something. Neither held the weight they used to, but I kept them anyway. Not as reminders of what I'd lost, but of what I'd learned. I didn't crave their table anymore. I had my own. And these days, I got to choose who sat with me. A little boy with a gap-toothed grin interrupted my thoughts. He held out a small paper craft, folded ribbon glued with uneven lines and love. "This is for you," he said, "because you showed up." I knelt to his level. "You made this?" He nodded. "It's a badge, like the ones grown-ups wear when they're important." I smiled, tears threatening to spill, but I held steady. "Well, thank you. I think this might be the best one I've ever had." I pinned it onto my lapel, right over the place where the old Caldwell crest used to sit, the one I wore the day they disowned me. This one was better. Softer, earned. The kids resumed their poetry readings, and I sat down in the back row, not to be seen, not to prove a point, just to be there, to listen, to belong on my own terms. Forgiveness, I had learned, isn't about pretending none of it hurt. It's not even about setting people free. It's about releasing yourself from the endless, exhausting hope that one day they'll finally understand. Some wounds don't get stitched by words. Some just stop bleeding when you stop picking them. And for the first time in a long, long while, the silence around me didn't ache. It held me. It made room. And I chose it. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people who should have protected you. But healing doesn't mean going back. It means moving forward on your own terms. Have you ever faced a moment like this, where walking away was the most powerful thing you could do? Share your story in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more real, powerful family drama, don't forget to subscribe. More stories like this are coming soon.